We have everything we need to be a country that is cohesive, wealthy, filled with smart, healthy people enjoying a variety of lifestyles in a gorgeous environment. We have everything we need to be a country that is fragmented and poor, filled with uneducated and unhealthy people who struggle every day and are surrounded by a damaged environment. I believe that to make it the best it can be, we need to know our country and we need to feel responsible for it. When you feel responsible for someone, say you're raising a child or you're managing someone at work, you pay attention to how they're doing. You look at the areas where they're struggling and you put measures in place to help them improve. You look at the areas where they're doing really well and you recognize it and you celebrate with them. Think about our country, our home. Do you know how it's doing? Over time, compared to other countries, the areas where it's doing exceptionally well and we should be celebrating, and the areas where it's struggling and needs our attention. Do you know that compared to other OECD countries, our 15-year-olds are ranked 4th for both reading and science? That we have the 5th highest number of cars per capita, and that we are 21st for GDP per capita, but in 1950, we were 4th. I believe that we are responsible for making our country the best it can be. We are responsible, not someone else. Others have specific roles to manage certain areas, but that does not stop us from being as responsible as anyone else for the overall outcomes. Now, New Zealand is already pretty great. I am deeply, madly in love with it. But we face challenges now, and others are looming, and performance in some important areas is declining. I believe that when we know our country, when we understand how it's doing, and when we feel responsible for it, that we can create a place that is a pleasure to live in for everyone here. I think knowing our country is such an important first step that I created Wiki New Zealand, a collaborative website making data about New Zealand visually accessible for everyone. It is filled with graphs, thematic maps, and infographics about New Zealand, with the purpose of enabling informed decision-making in all areas, at all levels, and to be a place where we can all go to get to know our country. Now, the reason that I was in a position to see the gap that it would fill and to have the idea for Wiki New Zealand is that I have spent many years being uninformed. I started this journey right at the other end of the scale. I grew up in rural Hawke's Bay and I had a beautiful upbringing. We didn't have much, but we had everything we needed. But I was extraordinarily unaware of the world I was growing up in. I didn't know anything about history, business, politics, and I didn't really see people who lived that differently than I lived. They may have been around, but I didn't see the differences. I thought that normal existed, and I thought that's what my life was. So it was a little surprising to realize that wasn't quite the case. My high school physical education teachers had the best jobs and lifestyles I had ever seen. So that's what I aspired to be. And I went off to university to become one. On that journey, I met many people from different walks of life for the first time. And it changed me to see how different everyone's backgrounds and experiences are. I remember discovering little things, like that large schools have more subject choices than small rural schools like mine, whereas I had always assumed that there was one set of subjects taught everywhere. So over the past 12 years or so, I have been gradually and consciously seeing more and more and gaining a broader and a deeper understanding of what is. Because I was brought up overflowing with buckets and buckets of unconditional love, I grew up unafraid to ask questions and unafraid to admit not knowing things. Especially coming from such a point of naivety, I think those traits were really important in my growing process. I used to get hassled for it sometimes. I remember saying, "Oh, I don't know what that word means," which is something I still regularly do. And a friend said to me, "I can't believe you would admit not knowing that." But my response is, I can't believe you wouldn't. I don't understand how we're supposed to grow and learn if we can't be honest about our starting position. So as I became aware of more, I saw new things I could do. So I left teaching, and I spent the next 6 years helping to run a software company with one foot in the visual effects industry and another in the high-tech industry. It was a whole new world for me to frequently leave the shores of New Zealand, to experience other countries and their cultures, and to be involved in the world of business. After a few years, I started to get quite interested in the context that we as a business were operating within. And I started to see that it was defined by a set of specific changeable rules, not just a normal that existed everywhere. Became really curious about what those rules were, who was making the rules, what rules other countries had, and what that meant for our overall outcomes. And so that led me to joining a think tank where we looked at social, economic, and environmental issues facing New Zealand. Working at the think tank exposed me to more than I had even dreamed existed. A year prior, I had no idea what GDP, OECD, or countless other terms meant. But I wasn't just exposed to new content, I was also exposed to different ways of thinking about it. But I will never forget what it felt like not to know, what it felt like to have no idea there were other doors to look through, let alone what was on the other side. We did research and analysis on the biggest issues facing New Zealand, and we provided solutions and recommendations for success. Over that time, I talked to hundreds of people, both in social and work contexts, and whether it was innovation in the economy, youth disadvantage, or environmental challenges, it struck me how very few people knew simple information, even if it was in areas where they really cared about. I did a talk in Whangarei on youth, and I remember putting up a chart showing that New Zealand has the highest rate of youth suicide out of OECD countries. People in the audience were quite shocked, and these are people who worked with youth. One person said to me, "That chart is going to make me work harder at my job. I had no idea that was the situation that we were dealing with." My experience at the think tank had exposed me to how much data was freely available to us. There are many great sources with data on a vast number of topics. And in my journey, I'm still yet to meet someone who doesn't care about New Zealand's future, who doesn't want to understand more about how it's doing. But hearing responses like that person in Whangarei, kept demonstrating to me that there was a disconnect somewhere. I identified that it was an issue of accessibility, not availability. The data that we have available to us is held within databases and spreadsheets, so to extract it into digestible formats, you need both time and skill. Think about time and skill. They're pretty big barriers, especially when it's something you don't have to do. So it means most people are excluded from ever really accessing the data on their own. When we do see data in digestible formats, it's generally because somebody is trying to convince us of something. That is a very legitimate use of data, but it is not sufficient for having a well-informed country. I care about all the issues: social, economic, environmental, and how they're all so dependent on each other. I started thinking about how, with all the different issues that we were addressing, it would have been easier to effect change if more people understood simple information about New Zealand. So Wiki New Zealand was born. I had the idea for it in February 2012, and we launched in December 2012. Wiki New Zealand presents data in simple, visual form only, no analysis, with the purpose of keeping it as unbiased and as accessible to everyone as possible. There are hundreds of graphs and thematic maps that you can navigate and search through to find something specific, but sometimes important answers are in areas where you don't know to ask the questions. So we designed a tagging system which encourages you to follow your nose and allow serendipitous discovery. The most comprehensive source of information about New Zealand will come from collaboration. There aren't just a few official sources with data about New Zealand. Many businesses, organisations and government agencies collect data that on an aggregate level can be shared. There just hasn't been a place to easily share it before. Wiki New Zealand redefines the audience for people with data about New Zealand. They can upload their data into our dynamic graph templates for auditing and publishing. My vision is for Wiki New Zealand to become part of our culture, for it to become normal to know your country. But of course, data alone isn't actually going to solve anything. But it is an important step in the process through information, knowledge, and wisdom. Without the data, we will continue to have binary debates on issues, rather than understanding the complexity that generally exists. When I learn new data, I think about it like I have a big mound of Play-Doh. When I learn a new data point, I make an indent. When you've only got one indent, there's no story to tell. You don't know what it's showing you. But the more and more you gather, the more of a detailed picture you can see. Whilst we may be entitled to choosing our own values, I don't think we're entitled to choosing our own sets of data to base our decisions off. I think understanding the different roles that data and values play is really important. If we can separate the two and have an agreed set of data, we can then turn our attention to having our conversations on our values. We can work to gain a conscious understanding of what we actually want and why we want it, rather than tricking ourselves into believing that there is an absolute right and wrong on the issues, and that we just always happen to be on the right side. We will change the conversation, and I think the conversation will put us in a better position to understand what we are prepared to risk for what we want, what we aren't prepared to risk, and what measures we need to put in place to ensure the best chance of success, whatever success is defined as. Recently, I was asked to describe the biggest challenges I had faced with Wiki New Zealand, and I couldn't think of anything to say. I've realised it's because I've never consciously processed the challenges separately. They are an accepted part of the journey. When they arise, I seek to understand them, and then I work to overcome them, often by enlisting the help of others. And we never stop striving to achieve our vision. It is the same throughout life, and it is the same for our country. Together, we face some big challenges, both local and global. We need to know our country. We need to engage with it, and we need to feel responsible for it. We need to be making good, informed decisions in all areas and at all levels, and we will surmount our challenges. We will never again have as much of our lives left as we do right now. My biggest wish is for you to know how powerful you are, for you to know that we actually get to choose our future.